stories are being attacked and taken off the air by corporations and the government, in our libraries, to our movie theaters and our personal streaming devices, whatever. And it's harder and harder with AI and all of the misinformation to understand what the truth is.
Hello, I'm Rashad Robinson, civil rights advocate, strategist, and author. And I'm the new host of Freedom Table. I have an all-star panel of folks who bring a wide range of experiences in storytelling, in media criticism, in criminal justice. Kendrick Sampson is a renowned actor and activist. He founded Build Power in 2019 to bring about, the opportunity to have more liberated storytelling and the future that we all deserve. Eric Deggans. Eric is the Knight Professor of Journalism and Media Ethics at Washington and Lee University in Virginia. He also serves as the critic at large at NPR. Josie Duffy Rice is a journalist, writer, podcaster, host, consultant whose work primarily has been around prosecutors, prisons, and other criminal justice issues. And Franklin Leonard is a cultural commentator, a film and TV producer. He's founder and CEO of The Blacklist, a company that has been dedicated to identifying and supporting remarkable screenwriting and fiction. Recently, my former organization, Color of Change, launched another report that I had worked really closely on called Normalizing Injustice. So much of the conversations in Hollywood about representation kind of come down to diversity. And we want to break this down much deeper than diversity. Folks can diversify a cast, but not actually diversify the content. So in a crime procedural show, you'll get way more black judges than you'll get in the real world. And why I don't want to take away jobs from those brothers and sisters. Having a black judge where a white writer's room sends the justice through their mouths in a symbolic way without any backstory doesn't actually do anything to help us contextualize the criminal justice system, the society we live in, race, or anything else. And at the same time, these shows are entertainment. I've campaigned against some of these shows, called out the networks at various times, advised in writers' rooms, and even worked as a producer on a show. And at times, sort of really wrestled with what we were doing. The power of this content to shape how people see the world, how people see these systems, how they respond, whether they are voters or on juries or in communities, is so incredibly clear. While I've campaigned and pushed back, I've also turned on my TV sometimes and seen some of my favorites in some of the juiciest roles that black folks can sometimes get on these shows, and enjoyed watching them get to eat up a scene, even though there was aspects of the justice system that were being portrayed. This conversation is not going to ask you to absolutely turn off your TV, or maybe it will. It's not going to tell you to consume all of the shows, or maybe it will. How do we make sense of it? Are these shows redeemable? I want to go to you first, Josie. Tell us a little bit, kind of break down for us, how accurate are these shows? Like, what should we know about? We know they're not documentaries, but talk to us about sort of what we're getting in terms of an understanding of how the justice systems work when we see these shows.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And what I would say is that these shows project the idea that the interest of the system is injustice, and that the goal is to determine the truth, to determine who is guilty or innocent, right? And that all of the separate parts of the system are along that path, along that current of trying to determine the answer to those questions. And that is a fundamental misunderstanding, right? The goal is convictions. That is the incentive that drives the system. The secondary goal is efficiency, right? So what we know is that most crime isn't reported. Most reported crime there are no arrests made, right? There's not even an arrest made in the case. Most arrests, 99.9% of arrests don't end in trial, like you see on TV all the time. They go to trial. That's not the case for almost any time that someone has been arrested, right? Most charges end in guilty pleas, which is not really about guilt per se. It's about risk because you risk a longer sentence by going to trial. And so the reason this is relevant is because so much of what these shows are doing is, again, projecting an ideal that's not just an ideal about the system, but an ideal about who we are, right? What America is, what we value. And that ideal is not represented in the actual system, right? It's not just that you see in these shows sometimes that sometimes it falls short, and yes, sometimes it falls short, but it's beyond that. It's that the goal of the actual system is not lofty, and it falls short to even meet its below standard goals. So the system, the shows like to talk about good apple, bad apple, who's the good guy, who's the like one cop that is always cutting corners, who's going to stand up to him. And at the end of the day, like that becomes a much less relevant question if the system itself does not have the goals that I think all of us here and most people would agree should be the goals of a justice system.
So, Franklin, you see a lot of scripts, right? You
Yeah.
also are just working across the industry with a lot of folks who are trying to break through, are trying to get their ideas forward, and there's always that question of like, how responsible does someone have to be? Who both how do they cater to an audience, and do they have to cater to a list of sort of social justice demands? But all of this, right, is related to power. Who's
Yeah.
powerful and who's not powerful? Who gets stories told about them that are fair and accurate, and who oftentimes doesn't? How do you sort of kind of respond to these, to the demands around the sort of responsibility? Where do you sort of sit as someone who is trying to help good content, good storytelling break through, and where do you see the conflicts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest conflicts that any writer has is that they're ultimately trying to serve two audiences when they write anything for film and television in order to make it available to the public. You're trying to serve the end user, the person that's going to be on their couch or on their phone or in a theater and watch the thing itself. But in order to even get access to that audience, you're trying to serve an audience of the people who will pay to make the thing. And increasingly, the number of people who that is low and becoming lower as you see increased media consolidation. And the people who you have to serve are the C-suite employees of those corporations who have a lot of other audiences themselves to serve. They're serving government regulatory organizations. They're serving local and federal law enforcement agencies that
Yeah.
they have to be in good stead with. I'm a big believer that artists should be able to make and tell the stories they want to tell. And if you want to make and tell a story about hero police and a justice system that works, fair play. Maybe you see the world in that way. But we also then need to have a world where someone can tell a story that is the opposite of that. That is the truth as we see it about policing, about the justice system, about the way in which the US government currently prosecutes the question of justice. And if you want to tell a different story, it's virtually impossible for you to tell that story because you can't get the resources to make it and distribute it to an audience large enough to actually consume it.
So I really appreciate that, Franklin, because one of the themes of these freedom conversations is always going to sort of be how profitable racism is, right? The incentive structures that drive, all of these decisions and all of these systems that we're talking about, because it's not simply about, our feelings and what we like and don't like. I remember in 2020 being invited into sort of every writer's room of every crime TV show where they just wanted to hear about how they could do things better. And some of them, white producers wanted kind of me to almost yell at them in front of their staff and tell them how they can do better. And Eric, I'm sure over this period over these years, you have seen the ups and downs of the kind of power and incentive structure, the ways in which the voices on the outside can have an influence, and sometimes the voices get moved out.
Yeah, we saw the incentive structures change a little bit because in 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, that sent shockwaves through pop culture. And that was when, of course, you saw a lot of people. I've had to deal with it. I'm sure you had to deal with it too. Folks wanting to bring you in to do these sort of performative consultancies where they could say, well, we brought somebody in to talk to us about diversity. And we did see some problematic shows like Cops get canceled. And of course, those shows that got canceled are now back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, with the rise of Trumpism and MAGA and the backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've sort of seen a lot of those advances roll back. I think the challenge that we have with police procedurals is twofold. The first one is that it's a easily creatable, easily understandable program form. It's something that network TV in particular has figured out it can make 5 or 6 different iterations of it, and people will watch it. It's not most of the time they're not serialized, right? So you can put them on in any order, and people can watch them. You can put them in reruns in any order, and people can watch them. And you can get a sort of cookie cutter factory floor kind of process for making them. You don't need super talented directors or writers to make these shows because they're a conveyor belt, essentially. But part of that is a formula in which you have good cops overcoming a broken system, or good cops overcoming bad cops, or but the idea, the drive toward justice, kind of has to be at the center of the show, or the people who are used to those very conventional, very formulaic shows will reject them.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I want to come back to that, and I want to bring Kendrick in on the earlier point that you made around how many of these shows get produced and how cookie cutter they are. And so I'm sure, Kendrick, you've gotten so many scripts over the years to play a cop, as every black actor that I have talked to has gotten. I remember a couple of years ago during the 50th anniversary of hip hop and seeing all the various performances, hip hop being such a intervention on so many kind of cultural norms that attacked black people, and seeing so many of those performances and being able to count the number of hip hop legends that were now TV cops, and thinking about, wow, like this is the pipeline to f the police, to being a police officer, can exist through the power of Hollywood. But how do you think about this at the level both as an individual actor, but as someone who's an advocate and a leader and a voice in the community that's really trying to push both for the type of content that we want to see, but also the type of representation that we all deserve?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have an audition today for a cop, and I don't want to do it. And so I mean, there's it's often something that's sensationalized. There's going to be high drama, some high stakes. There's going to be guns. There's going to be and this is entertaining. I do think that there's an audience for an alternative. I'll say that. Like, I do think that people are really interested in when tragedies, when harm happens in the community, how the community overcomes it, how, a family gets through it, through that struggle. It doesn't always have to be centered on law enforcement, right? In order to sort through whatever the problem is, whatever the crime is, right? I think that there's a surge in the demand to justify whiteness, just and people are pushing more and more the harm of people who don't fit that those parameters around whiteness, especially I'm just gonna be black folks, you know what I mean, brown folks. The harm against those people has been sensationalized. It's something that people now want to, and I'm not saying us, we don't want to see us harmed. We are really asking and demanding new narratives, new stories that are real, stories that are true. And right now what's being pushed is the opposite of that, right? There is an audience that wants to see us harmed, that wants to see us punished for being, just being. And I think that a lot of the delusional narratives that come around cops, and the demand for those is more about justifying their own injustice, their own harm.
You and Franklin are kind of saying something a little different here, but I also want to bring everyone into this conversation. It's not totally different, but it's a little. I'm also just interested in where the intervention points are, right? If we don't think, I think for most of us, we're not saying we're going to get these shows off the air, right? If people who are watching are trying to think about what is my role, what do I do here? Like, do I spend more time trying to find the good shows? Do I avoid those marathons of the shows that will not be named? And what do I do? Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that racism is very profitable, and that is definitely true. It's been true for the history of
Yeah.
Hollywood. The first Hollywood blockbuster was Birth of a Nation, which, it trafficked exclusively in white supremacy, in the notion of black criminality, criminality of black people being subhuman, and was really responsible for creating, not reinforcing, but creating the iconography of the Ku Klux Klan that led to lynchings. I mean, literally the burning crosses, the white sheets. That was birthed in Birth of a Nation as a movie and then replicated by these terrorist organizations that subjected black people to violence throughout the country, right? That is the blood that Hollywood was birthed in. But I think what we also know is that there is more money to be made in not being racist, in not being white supremacist, right? And again, I was involved in a study that McKinsey and Company, not exactly social justice warriors by any stretch of the imagination, they did an investigation on what is the economic cost of anti-black discrimination in Hollywood. And what they found is that as an industry, we are leaving $10 billion a year on the table
Right.
as a result of the various discrimination against black creators and black executives in the industry. And that's just black folks. You add the Asian American community, it's another $2 to $4 billion a year. You add the Latino community, it's another 12 to 18 billion. So when we hear people talk about building the wall and kicking these immigrants out of the country, they're not saying that because they individually know a Latino immigrant who's a criminal. They're saying it because they've seen on TV that Latino immigrants are engaged in crime, when in fact the exact opposite is true, right? When we talk about black criminality, I think the FBI found that more than 50% of the gang members shown on television were shown to be black, when the reality is less than 30% of the gang members in America are black. But to put aside that, let's say you're not down with all the woke stuff and you just want to get this money.
Yeah.
The most direct way to do that is by having more people of color, more diversity in both the creative class, but also in the boardroom class that is making the decision about what gets greenlit. And when you do that, you get more things like Sinners and Black Panther and everything Ava DuVernay makes and everything Shonda makes and everything Issa makes. And guess what? Those shows, those movies make a ton of money.
Well, I'd say that there are a couple big challenges when you're trying to push back against these shows. The first one is that there's too many programmers who know how to quickly create shows like this and throw them on the air and make money off of them. So you're asking them to break a pattern that they're comfortable with. And then the other problem is that you're asking society to face this idea that the criminal justice system that's been created to protect them is not really protecting a lot of people, and has a different purpose than they want to believe it is.
Yeah.
And so to push back against all of that is it's going to take consumers. I'm constantly telling viewers that they have more power than any viewers in the history of the medium, because of the way that viewership is tracked in streaming and the way that you can speak out on social media. You have more power than any audience has ever had. So seek out those shows that center black culture, non-white culture, that humanize non-white characters, and reject those shows that don't.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, look, I watch so much bad television that I have no business telling anybody else what to watch. But I do think that, like, when we engage with any sort of work for consumption, the question is, like, what prism are we seeing it through? And making sure that we are asking tough questions, And understanding how this is not representative of reality is really important. I would say the second thing is I notice it a lot with kids. There's a lot of cop centered, policing centered content for children. And I think that's a place where you can kind of intervene early and have some of these conversations that you are shaping the way that they think about the police moving forward. So those would be my two suggestions.
Honestly, I just think right now we're in a time where uh, genocidal evil like is being emboldened, right? Like there is, I mean, like it's, there's no overstatement I can provide on how evil this administration, this regime is, and a lot of the harm happening all over the world. And I do think we have some decisions to make here. And I do think we're at a pivotal transition time, right? Where it's really hard. One, our stories are being attacked and taken off the air by corporations and the government in our libraries, to our movie theaters and our personal, streaming devices, whatever.
With that, thank you all. The challenge, the opportunity, the complications, and all of it. Josie, Franklin, Eric, Kendrick, thank you for joining us for the first Freedom Table, and so much appreciation.
Thanks
Thank
for having
you
us.
so much, Rashad.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.